right, so we are live now. So good morning, everyone, and I'm happy to be back. So I had a great trip last week to England for my quote-unquote real job, and my trip there actually caused me to think about today's topic. So the problem with distance, or the tyranny of distance. So I'm staying in a little English village, and some of the walls in this village are original. They're original stone. I mean, these are walls that are hundreds of years old at this point. And you can tell they've been mortared over and plastered over. And the walls for the actual building that I stayed in, I mean, they were probably 2 or 3 feet thick because they have been built up and insulated and all those things. And as I'm walking around the town, the roads are very narrow, and there are little shops everywhere, and people have houses in different places. It's very, sort of idyllic rural village in England, rolling hills, very green. But I started to think about what the differences are between life there and life here. And I thought about it in terms of distance. So you could walk through the town in probably 15 or 20 minutes. You could probably walk all the way around the town in about an hour or an hour and a half. And I observed the interactions of the people who lived in the town. And one of the things that struck me was that just about every night, most people go to the pub. Now, going to the pub in England is not the same as going to the bar in the US, right? When you go to the bar, it's usually for adults only. You're there to drink, maybe to socialize. But the pubs in England they're more community focused, right? So people are there, they're there with their kids. One of the pubs has like a little games closet for the kids to sit and play, and the adults talk. People bring their dogs. It's very much a community place. And there are 3, 4, 5 pubs in this little village that people can go to and hang out and have a conversation. And that's what they'd be doing. They'd be having conversation, they'd be having a couple of drinks, maybe be having dinner, because most of them were restaurants as well. And so I thought about what would happen, or what would life be like if we lived smaller, if we lived in closer proximity to each other. And then I wondered what some of the problems might be with how we live today, particularly in America, where we're very, very spread out and everything requires a car. So today's service is brought to you by England, and some of the ways that life is constructed there. So I want to offer a couple of thoughts for consideration this week, and then we'll have a good conversation about it afterward. So I had previously spent time in Europe, and the villages there are walkable as well. The interesting difference, so I used to live in Germany. The difference to me that I consider between England and Germany is most of the villages in England have been that way for hundreds of years, but a lot of the places in Germany had been destroyed during the war. So the things that were rebuilt in Germany are actually a bit more modern than in terms of spacing and whatnot than places in the UK. But both of those things, or both of those places are walkable, right? They have more public transportation. They live a bit more densely populated, and so it's easier to get around as a pedestrian. So there's this concept in architecture and urban planning today called human scale cities or human scale communities, and some of you may have heard of it. And a lot of it has to do with being focused on the pedestrian. There's a really great Adam Ruins Everything, if you've ever seen that show, about cars, how cars are cool, or there's a status symbol associated with them. And he talks specifically about when cars first came into the mainstream, how streets used to be for pedestrians. And they very quickly became places for cars. And then we started building our cities and our suburbs for cars and not for people. And so to me, there are some consequences to that. But first I want to talk about just logistics in general and how we build and space things. So one, there are always ups and downs to everything that happens throughout the course of human history. So specialization and globalization did things for us such as decrease the cost for goods and services and dramatically increase the quality of life, right? So our ability to import cheap goods from abroad and have specialized high-tech industry here has benefited us greatly, particularly in the US. So, but what it also does is it increases reliance on long logistical lines. Think about where your food comes from, right? Particularly people in the cities in the US. Most of them don't even know how food grows. They just know it shows up and they get food from the grocery store. That's where food comes from, right? It doesn't come from the land or from a farm. So one of the things that some elites or academics are worried about is what would happen, for instance, if the US was struck by an electromagnetic pulse, right? A detonation over the middle of the US would knock out most of our electrical systems in the country. And part of the issue with that is that 90% of the population would starve, right? So there's tons of food in the US. No one would ever question that we lack for food, but we use an enormous amount of energy and time to get it from place to place, right? Huge amounts of transportation required, refrigeration, all of these things, and it's all just in time. So while globalization has increased our standard of living, it's also introduced some potential instability or a significant amount of risk. So that reduces then our resilience to catastrophe. So again, we could grow food locally, but there's a cost associated with that, right? So it would take a little bit more, probably money just to do that, because we wouldn't be relying on huge economical, in terms of efficiency, farms and production lines for whatever it is that we're trying to produce. So the question I would ask in terms of logistics is, can we rethink production, and not for all things, right? It doesn't make sense for us to bring back, whatever, pick your job to the local area. If you try to bring every job or every product back to a local area, we would quickly be overrun by inefficiency. Costs would skyrocket, and it wouldn't be a sustainable model. But are there certain things that we could bring back, such as food? And we've seen this in the growth of farmers markets and organic food. Of course, for another conversation, organic is a very loosely defined term, but local food, right? Those are things that might actually make sense logistically, because primarily what you're transporting when you transport food is water, and water is heavy. So could we scale some of those things back, not just to make it local, but for the point of introducing more resilience into a local system, so that a city might be sustainable in the case of a catastrophe? So that's the question I'll leave you with on logistics, and then we'll move to community. So this is the one that I thought of more deeply throughout my trip, is as we have developed as a society, distance was always something that we were a bit of a slave to. It was very hard to cover a large amount of distance. And of course, throughout most of human history, we also didn't have the time for entertainment, right? We were worried about feeding ourselves and feeding our family and moving to the next generation. But I would say sometime after the Second World War, and then particularly in the US, there was an inversion of the friction associated with distance and the friction associated with entertainment. Entertainment used to be where you were required to go to a communal place to get entertainment. So once we had grown to the point where we had time to spend on being entertained, we still had to engage in the community, right? And before that point, before when we didn't have time for entertainment, we still relied on the community for a lot of things, right? Helping to build houses, farms, sustaining our families required interaction with other people. That's how we traded, bartered, etc. And so for a time, we still had community through entertainment, right? So movies became big, motion pictures, but you all had to go to the movie theater. We didn't all have a handy box in our house that played movies for us. And then as cars developed, we started to spread out farther and farther, right? And so we would travel more distances, which actually reduces the amount of time we have overall, but we had grown this appetite for entertainment. And then as technology continued to develop, we saw the rise of personal entertainment, right? Where we could bring movies home with us. There's a book called Bowling Alone, which documents sort of the decrease in social engagement in the US. And in the 1970s, we used to entertain people on average 15 times a year as Americans. Today, actually, I think it was by 2000, the number was about half of that. And there is no one, particular factor that drove that, but I think the combination of distance and then the desire and ease of entertainment has reduced our need, or our perceived need, for that social interaction. It's easier to stay home and Netflix and chill. And that has to do very much with the friction associated with distance, right? It's hard to get up and you gotta get dressed, then you gotta drive 15 to 40 minutes to go to whatever the social entertainment happens to be. But I can immediately, instantly, and cheaply turn on the television or a movie or stream things on my phone anywhere in the world to get entertainment. And if you've ever looked into the psychology and the research behind entertainment, and particularly video games, or even Facebook, social media, those things are designed to be addictive, right? Because they all have a business model that requires your attention. So what you're doing is you're trading, or you're selling your time to that company, and that's what they are winning. They win on time. Now, the time is monetized, but that's really what the bottom line cost is. So we've made it so addictive and also so easy to be entertained that the threshold for saying, I really want to go out with my friends, is such a higher bar than just staying home and turning on the television. So I think there are costs associated with that. And so I think at the point that this really happened is both the rise of VHS and cable television in the US. Because even before, when we all had television, or most of us had televisions, or even most of us had radio, we still tuned into the same few programs, right? So the entertainment was unifying instead of dividing. But I think when people started to be able to order their entertainment to suit them specifically, is where we started to withdraw more from society. Because we find the things that are specifically tailored to catch our attention and to be addictive to us, right? Think about binge watching shows. And that's where the bar for social interaction became higher. And then at the same time, going back to a little bit of the logistics and the infrastructure piece, our communities have become less conducive to social interaction, right? When you think about suburbia and you think about suburban sprawl, people are so separated. Right, so it took me 15 or so minutes to drive here today. Some of you probably took closer to 20 or 30 minutes to drive here today, right? 100 years ago, you'd have, the one church building or the one community building that everyone could walk to in 5 or 10 minutes, right? That changes the threshold, the level of friction required to go and participate in some community event. So another thing that Bowling Alone documents is a dramatic decrease in volunteerism, right? Again, if you have a choice between entertainment that is designed for you and going out and helping other people where you have to spend a large amount of energy getting there, which one is naturally going to win out? And so we need to start thinking about how do we reprogram our incentive system to help facilitate those things, right? Help facilitate the community engagement. Of course, this makes the assumption that it's worthwhile. I think most of us would argue that community engagement social engagement is worthwhile because we're social creatures. And we see the increase in mental health problems in today's world. I think some of those things are attributable to our lack of connection, or our false sense of connection, may be driven by our particular use of social media, and then the level of friction that we perceive is required to engage in some sort of social interaction. So the change in how, why, and where we live cost us, and what it specifically cost us is the time that we would otherwise spend engaging with others, right? The thing that is worth the most is our time, because it's the only thing really that's finite. And so how our world has developed, it got us here, but it might not be the thing that sustains us or helps us jump to something better in the future. And what's interesting is, with all of the technology we have today and all of the resources we have, we feel more busy, right? I hear people talk about being busy all the time. Oh, I'm so busy. I have so many things to do, right? Whether it's activities that you bring your kids to or all the shows you have to watch, right? We're all so busy. But if we really step back to think about it, and we'll talk about this more next week, we have an enormous amount of time to get after the big problems if we build our incentive system to do that. So how do we get away from this? How do we move away from this shortfall of community and engagement in terms of distance? So first, going back to the logistical piece, we can demand human scale communities, right? So we try and buy houses or even develop property that is built to the human scale, right? So we have this mindset in America in particular of the American dream. The American dream is a single family home on a little bit of land that is basically not beholden to anybody else. I know when I moved to Virginia for my job, my wife and I were very skeptical about having a townhouse, right? We'd always had single family houses that were separate from other people, and we didn't know if we were going to have bad neighbors or people were going to complain about noise, and so we had all of these concerns about living right next to other people. Turns out it was one of the best places we've lived because that particular circle had a bunch of families with younger kids, and which we had as well. And our next door neighbor, we ended up becoming great friends with, and they had 2 kids that were about our children's age, and we would trade babysitting back and forth. And in terms of family or the idea of extended family, few Americans still live with their extended family, right? Unlike other cultures where they live in larger family units with you know, the grandmother and the grandchildren and the parents all live in the same house, maybe with some aunts and uncles, and there are efficiencies to be gained by that. And we found, because it was kind of like adopting, you know, a brother and sister into our family, that we were able to trade babysitting back and forth, which seems a small thing, but again, gives us time that we were able to make more efficient for each other and then engage as couples to build strong relationships. So to me, that ended up being a huge net benefit in living in a house that was connected to someone else as opposed to having my own little castle. So that's one of the things that we can do in terms of logistics in designing communities is realize that you may give up something. You may give up the ability to, you know, blast music at 85 decibels or 185 decibels. I guess I picked a random number. You might have to turn it down just a bit, right, or go to headphones, but that you might gain something in having a neighbor. I know during that time there was a huge blizzard, and in that little circle, we had built up a community and we talked to each other regularly where we checked on each other. We had a plan that if power went out in one house that we would consolidate into another one to maintain heat. Right? Those are the things that you gain by having a human scale community. And so it may also cost more money. So instead of having huge apartment complexes, building little units where you can have either an actual family or an adopted family as opposed to being sort of a nameless face just in a building. That might be a little bit less efficient, but gains us in the time and the connection that we actually need. So what else we can do is grow and produce products locally, right? So whether that's in terms of actual, you know, products, goods, and services, or even just food, right? And it doesn't have to be all the food. Like we don't have to grow every type of tropical fruit in one little apartment complex or neighborhood square, but you could get some of the basic things, or even participate in community gardens, or even personal or herb gardens that connect you a little bit more with your supply line, right? Helps you to be more connected, be more conscious of where your energy and your food comes from. And I think in doing so, one, that actually builds resilience, because if we're producing food, then we have a mechanism to do so in the case that our communities are cut off for whatever reason. But two, it gets people, again, reconnected with how does food work? How should we think about food? And then the third thing is reclaiming spaces for that human interaction, whether it's parks, recreational spaces, community centers, right? So the long-term vision for Being Human Church is that we eventually have a building, right? An actual church building. And the point of the church building is not to be a monument to an ideology, but to be a place for community to happen. Whether it's a place where someone can offer a skills building class or some sort of education, or a place to watch children so that parents can seek services or gain their own skills, go to night school, right? So it's a place where we can gain human efficiencies by engaging with each other. And in terms of the community, some of this is what we can do today. It's just changing our incentive systems and maybe in some places introducing some friction into our easy entertainment. I'd seen a discussion online about how in the tech world, reducing user interface friction is the #1 thing that you do. The goal is to make everything as seamless and easy as possible, and that allows people to continue, or incentivizes people to continue to engage with your platform. But some in that world are starting to question whether we shouldn't introduce a little bit of friction. Think about how easy it is to scroll down hours worth of Facebook, or go into the YouTube spiral, right, and just watch videos and you don't know where the time went. There's so little friction in those systems that it's difficult for us, the way our psychology is programmed, to realize that we're spending more time than we may like. Now, it works for those platforms because they gain money, and that is how the system is incentivized. I don't think they're inherently evil or anything like that. The incentives are make more money for your organization, make more money for your stockholders. So that means that we, at least at this step, need to figure out how to introduce some friction to say, maybe I should think about this for a second and ask whether I should be spending time elsewhere. So one is making the effort for civic and social engagement. Think about how often you want to engage and what outcomes you want to have. So when Jen gave her talk a few months ago, she and I were both very happy just being with each other. And then we had children. And then we realized that we need more help than we can provide for each other. We need people to help watch kids so that we can have a night off, right? A night with each other. We need that sort of social interaction, of adult human interaction, to keep sane. But we had not built that network. And so we were at a shortfall. So what we did subsequently, and it was mostly Jen, is she really conceptualized, what is it that I want out of my adult life? And part of what she wanted was to have a network of human connection. So this morning she went out with a group of ladies to have breakfast, and I watched the kids, right? So we've engaged very specifically, but we built in the incentives, right? And a lot of them are mental. We know that it's good for us, but we remind ourselves, hey, this is good for us. I'm going to put in the effort to make events, and I'm going to get dressed and go out to them. And then you constantly reinforce, like, I really enjoyed that. I'm glad I did it. So that's one of the things that we can do. Another is volunteering. Most people, when they volunteer, feel fantastic about it. But doing that first step of finding out where to volunteer and then getting ready and going there, especially during the first 1 or 2 times that you go, is somewhat intimidating, right? You don't know anyone. You don't know if you're going to click with the group. It's more, general social anxiety. And so doing that, just making the effort, say, you know what, I'm going to volunteer 1 time per month, right? Whatever the time scale is one of those things that you could do today to help shrink things to the human scale. Realize that we can connect with each other today. Obviously, I would promote coming to our Being Human Church, right? So one of the 3 things that we say that we offer is community. That's why we decided church is the right word, because it's one of those things that throughout history has always provided a place for community. The other 2 things being purpose and consistency. And then introduce friction into your entertainment. And this might be as simple as giving yourself a limit on the number of hours that you watch television, right? It's something you would do to your kids, right? We don't want our kids watching television 20 or 30 or 40 hours a week. So how can we model that? Both for ourselves and our friends. Say, No, I would rather spend my time reading a book or having a book club, even better, or going out and talking with people about issues or volunteering, whatever it happens to be. And then reducing the friction barriers to being social. Joining groups is one of the best ways to do that because you are not always solely responsible for making the event, right? You can share the burden by being a part of a group where different people will set up events. And that's one of the things we do within the Being Human Church community and then the Bash community as well, right? People come up with different events and they just throw them out there and people show up when they can and don't when they can't. There's a really great article, and I couldn't find it for today, about how a group of parents basically decided that they wanted to have an open invitation for the other couple basically to come over with their kids for dinner on any day at any time. And the deal was there would be no pretension about how the house would look or what food would be there, but the deal was you could show up any day at any time and we would figure out what to eat. You know, if you've got some leftovers and I've got some leftovers, that's what we're going to do. We're going to dig in the fridge, we're going to find whatever's in the freezer, but we're going to make an effort to be a community, to be an extended family. And I thought that was a really interesting and novel idea. What if we, instead of posturing for, you know, the Instagram feed or the Facebook, whatever, where people are coming over, and we put everything away, all the garbage that's in our house that's going to be there after people leave, we just said, you know what? Come on over. Let's hang out. We'll figure out the food situation, but let's engage with each other. I thought that was very powerful, and it's something that I would offer to you all to consider is how can we reduce those barriers? Can we set up arrangements with people that we know and trust to be like, you know what? Just give me a ring and come on over whenever you want to, and we'll figure it out. And yeah, there might be some friction in there, or it might not be the best day, but usually when friends come over, it's always a better day. Right? So we might have that apprehension at the beginning, but once we do it, we realize, you know what, that was worth it. Usually just for the conversation alone. I know that whenever we have events, the conversation alone makes it worthwhile. And then the last thing is to reconsider the family arrangement. Right? To me, and this is something I've realized as I've grown older, I was very independent growing up and I wanted to get out of the house as soon as possible. And I got out of the house and I made my way in life and I have a house and a family and it's excellent. But I really wish I were closer to my mom in particular. I enjoy having her around. We have a great relationship. And to be very selfish about it, it's really great when she comes to watch the kids, right? It introduces a huge amount of flexibility into our schedule. But there's a lot to be gained from having extended family nearby. So what if we rethought the whole idea of being at home or having a multi-generational family? What if we built houses differently to account for that? Where you have the in-law suite or you have a little bit of separation, but you're there for each other. How do we reorganize our lives to account for that? What efficiencies could be gained? I imagine you could probably eliminate at least one car, if not two, out of an extended family. Instead of everyone needing a car, you only need 2 cars or maybe 3 cars for a larger family. Because 90% of the time that we own a car, it sits parked. There's some great statistics on that. How would we reorganize the actual living arrangements, right? So instead of having multiple separate houses, each with their own infrastructure, plumbing, electricity, etc., what if you had a family complex, which is very common, particularly in the Middle East, that housed a larger number of people that would be more efficient to build, maintain, run the utilities on. I think there are a lot of ideas out there that we could consider today to start moving in that direction. But we have to do it with a mind toward what is the end goal. And to me, I think the end goal is to build a human society that helps decrease division and helps keep us oriented on the things that matter, such as saving humanity from itself or from existential threats. So with that in mind, thank you very much for coming today. I hope this was a topic of interest and enlightenment for you all. And for those at home, again, I would ask you to name one thing that you are grateful for in the week previous, and then think of one thing that you're looking forward to in the week to come. So for me, I know last week I appreciate Chris leading the discussion last week for Sunday services. I'm hoping to have more guests as we move forward to help increase the diversity of our conversations. And in the week to come, I think in 2 weeks to come, we're headed to Jackson, Mississippi to go and look at a cooperative that has, or is developing still there, but has stood up and is developing there to start to operate differently. And particularly in that logistics piece of how can we provide for ourselves at the community level, and particularly in this case, a community that no one else is helping to provide for it. So with that, thank you. Have a wonderful week.